Okay, so
Great. So let me know when I should start.
go ahead.
He's here as well.
Super. So let me just start by welcoming everyone. I'm Neela Majumdar with earthday.org, and I'm speaking to you from Calcutta, India. Earthday.org is basically a network, and Earth Day on April 22nd is commemorated, I think, in more than 196 countries, and we call it the largest movement, non-religious movement in the world. And we basically network with organizations. We have more than 50,000 partners. And today, being International Day of Education, we decided with the Learning Planet Festival, which is commemorating this from the 24th till the 28th, to bring on board various experts on climate literacy, on environment, because that is our interest. But we spoke to Tamsil, who's a storyteller, and basically he said he would get a bunch of panelists together. And so we've got the next 45 minutes on this session, and Samita will tell us more what is in store for us. But do log on to all the other sessions. Day Network has organized some 6 of them, and there are more than 400 organizations on board during this week to talk about not only environment, but education and where health, basically the planet. So over to you, Samita, to take this forward.
Thank you so much, Neela. So I'll start the panel now. We all know about climate change, but do we know the stories of communities who are living with climate change? The power of creativity and storytelling could practically change the course of the climate crisis. We have the facts, we have the policy solutions, we have research, we have science experts. What we don't have are normalized stories for a livable future, stories that motivate people to find and act on solutions. That's why we need artists, writers, creatives, and filmmakers. We need those new stories. I'm Shamita Harsh from People Like Us Create, and I welcome you all to our session on climate storytelling at the Learning Planet Festival, which is organized every year around around International Education Day in partnership with UNESCO and hundreds of pioneering organizations in the field of education, culture, science, social and environmental impact, as well as with thousands of students from all over the world. This event is an effort to bring amazing creatives and storytellers together to discuss what impacts and action can storytelling create for climate change, right from connecting data to humans to bringing optimism from underrepresented voices to the climate conversations. Today, our goal is to find how effective storytelling can drive change. For this, we have an exciting panel lined up for all of you. This panel is organized by LetMeBreathe, a global climate change and sustainability storytelling platform, along with the Learning Planet Festival and Earth Day Network. Now, I would move on to introduce you all to our panelists. First up, we have Isaias Hernandez, who is a freelance environmental educator and content creator, focusing on topics like veganism, zero waste, and environmental justice. Hailing from Los Angeles, California, where he has lived in a community that faced environmental injustice, that has prompted him to work in learning about the environment and protecting it. Next, I have Andres Colmenares, who's the co-founder of Internet Age Media. He's the creative research lab that helps responsible citizens and organizations make better decisions while exploring the socio-ecological impacts of digital technologies and infrastructures. He's also the co-director of the Billion Seconds Institute, a lifelong learning initiative to reimagine the digital economy, and organizer of the IAM Weekend, the annual community-driven gathering at Barcelona for creative professionals looking to collectively rethink the future of the internet. Next, we have Neha Sinha, who is an award-winning wildlife conservationist. She has studied biodiversity conservation at Oxford University after winning an INLACS scholarship and works with Bombay Natural History Society. She's also a noted columnist and has taught environmental politics at Delhi University. She's also the author of the book Wild and Willful. Next, I have Tobias Groot, who has background in several award-winning strategic design and branding agency. Today, he's heading the development and implementation of a joint Nordic place brand initiative by the Nordic Council of Ministers. As part of this work, he's the driving force behind the Global Talk concept and podcast series Nordic Talks, which is designed to provide a space for contemplation and to share inspiration on how to act on sustainability issues in our everyday lives. And finally, I'm moving on to our moderator for the day, Tamsil Hussain, who is the founder and CEO of People Like Us Create. I will now hand over the panel to him.
Thank you so much, Shamata. And I want to give like a really warm welcome to everyone. And it's amazing that we're actually talking about climate storytelling on World Education Day, because it's such a powerful medium to be able to see how we can connect communities in a very powerful way. And I want to start off this panel in a very, very different way, because all of us work on some very unique stuff, which is built with communities which are, you know, in a way, I would say micro communities that are siloed, right? But how do we really get our work to the masses? So if I have to say, the first question I'd like to ask is Tobias. And the way we're going to answer this question is by talking about our story a bit and how we do this. Tobias, you actually have worked with communities and actually enabled them to come together, from telling stories in the UN office back in New York to Tukums in Latvia. Can you tell us a bit about how you used community storytelling and art to drive collective action? And I remember we met briefly at COP27 when you were doing this amazing project, right? Which was so brilliant. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I can tell you, well, thank you, and thanks for inviting me, first of all, and good to see you again, Tamsil. As you mentioned, we met at COP27, and to those of you who haven't been to a COP before, it's like standing in the Tokyo subway in the middle of rush hour. So there's like people all over. Everybody's really busy. Everybody's totally stressed out, and it's a nightmare, basically. But this year, the Nordic Council of Ministers, for the 8th year in a row, we had a joint pavilion at the COP. Usually we show beautiful pictures of windmills and solar panels and other cool inventions. But this year we wanted to try something else, because everybody's showing the same pictures. So we decided to include art as a driver for communication at the pavilion. So we started off with a pavilion that was all white, and everybody was walking by and thinking, what the fuck what are they doing here in the Nordic countries? But the thing we did was we asked people to come by and paint their breath strokes. So you got a paintbrush in your hand, and then you painted your breath. And we had ministers, and we had presidents. We even had a princess from Africa coming and painting their breath strokes. And they were so happy, because we gave them just 3 seconds of ease of mind, 3 seconds of zen, where they could concentrate and just be themselves. And during the 2 weeks of the COP, this beautiful artwork emerged on the walls, and we could tell the story of how important it is to, well, also think of yourself, that you as an individual can contribute to something larger. And with the breath, we tried to put focus on clean air, and it was really effectful. I can't remember, Tamsil, if you also painted, but you probably did and contributed, so thank you.
Oh, definitely. I think I love that project. I saw so many people engaging with it. It looked beautiful. If I have to just push it a bit forward, how would you take this to the masses, right? How do we influence the masses using this art and connecting community engagement? How would you answer that, Tobias?
Well, I think it's important, if you want to engage the masses, you have to talk to the individual as well. Mass communication, well, as we know it from back in the old days, I think it's dead. So if you want to engage people, you need to talk to them, and you need to involve them in order to get your message out. So well, that's at least what I think. You can't, well, do with just billboards and TV commercials anymore. That's still last year.
So that's amazing, and we're going to dig deeper into it. But I want to move to Andres. Andres, I'm a I'm a part of the I Am community. And for a lot of people who don't know what the I Am community is, it's a collection of some of the most amazing thinkers and designers who come together to solve the future problems of the future, right? A lot of futurists, a lot of designers who come together. And the work you do, Andres, is really connected to, it's at the intersection of design, climate storytelling, and data. And what are the ways we can actually create comprehensive solutions? Because you've like hundreds and hundreds of people across the world who join the community and build various projects out of it. How can we really simplify it for the masses, according to you, Andres?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation, Tamsil, and very glad to meet all of you and everyone watching this live or recorded. Well, actually, I would like to challenge a bit some words that you're using in the question, because as Tobias was saying, I think that we need to move beyond the idea of the masses and also the looking for simple approaches and simple solutions. I actually am a firm believer in the need to complexify the way that we are approaching the multiple crises that humanity and other forms of life in the planet are dealing with. And here is where I'm also a firm believer that multiple ways of storytelling are essential, because I think we can say that the crisis at the intersection of all the crises is a crisis of imagination, and in particular a crisis of sociological imagination, which is the ability to see the context that is shaping our individual decision making, as well as the decisions that others make. So if we see this crisis through the lens of a crisis of imagination, what a better, let's say, healing mechanism, healing artifact than a good story. And what we have been learning in having conversations with people from very different contexts in very different places is that we actually don't need new stories. That what we really need is to remember and listen to stories that have been erased by from centuries by systems of oppression, and listen to our elders, listen to the plants, which are our original teachers. So there's I think an increasing need to think of storytelling in terms of listening, of remembering, and also to connecting dissolving the idea of the masses, because as I mean, you some of you or all of you are very good storytellers. You know that a good story knows or is connecting with the context of those who are engaging with the story. So we need to think of an intergenerational context, right? So that is kind of moving towards many seconds into what we understand as the future. But in my understanding, futures are nothing else than stories, but also being responsible for our ancestors. So we are in crises that need a very hyper-local context, that are rooted in the land and its memories, but at the same time using the internet to connect it in a translocal way, which is what is already happening and is giving us a lot of hope. And then scale it to the planetary, of the sense of belonging to the planet Earth, and remembering things as essential as our sacred relationship, sacred bond with the sun. Yeah, this is a little bit of a messy answer for a messy crisis.
So Andres, just a question, right? Internet is a double-edged sword, right? It can actually help solve the problem of crisis of imagination, but also propel misinformation, specifically climate misinformation, going 10 ways forward. Would you like to give an example of some of the projects that you're actually working on to solve the problem of crisis of imagination? And at the same time, do you foresee all kinds of information coming your way, which might not be in the right context?
We are trying our best to, from our position and our expertise, our privilege as well, to take the different forms of climate action and inviting others as well, as much as we can. In a very, from a very personal journey, I have been slowly researching a topic called solar center designing, which is tapping on what I just mentioned of how can we remember our sacred bond with the sun, and think of design as, you know, decision making more than visual, fancy visual outputs, and how can, by, let's say, remembering the role that the sun has in our lives, like, which is sacred, how can we shift the way that we are making everyday decisions, but also at the scales of communities, of cities. So that is one thread of work that is ongoing, that is slow on purpose, and I can share a link of so far the latest outputs. I'm also involved with collective called Open Climate, which is was created a couple of years ago, but people from, like, veterans of the open movement, from different sides of the open movement, that are willing to bring open practices, open approaches, open culture principles to climate action, and also organizing people across open communities that are interested in taking climate action. So I'm helping them coordinate a fellowship program, and we are going to work this year in a declaration that yeah, hopefully will bring more people also into using open practices. So we want to learn from climate activists, in particular people working in climate justice, and see how the open can be of value. And then another project that we have in relation to the more, like, technical and data side of things is a master program in that is looking at responsibility as a value to design for when it comes to designing artificial intelligence systems. So it's essentially looking at the cultural, social, environmental implications of using AI systems, and bringing perspectives that are not dominant in the conversation. So artists, designers, journalists, storytellers, essentially, to demystify these very problematic narratives that are built around AI as a superhuman or beyond human force, when it's just it's a field of knowledge, an old one, actually. So it's here we're very interested essentially in the intersection of the topics that I just mentioned.
Thank you so much. I would love to explain that to Chat GPT, which I have a lot of trust issues with right now, and that would be amazing. But I love that just 10 minutes into the conversation, we have air, we have sun, all these things that are rooted into our practices, our life, our livelihood, right? Isaiah, I would like to ask next question to you, because one of the most important things you do is connected to representation. And one of the things, and you also recently featured in this beautiful, beautiful article with Billie Eilish in Vogue, right? And I'd love to know how you enable voices and enable stories at the front lines of climate movement, picking up from what Tobias was talking, what Andres is talking. You're really working with the communities on the front line across the world. And I'd love to know, what is your learning? What are your learnings about this?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things about climate storytelling is that it strives away from uniformity and actually celebrates diversity of thought. So when we look at the climate crisis, and this is a lot of the speakers that have been saying this, is that the crisis of imagination, the crisis of culture. But I like to also say that, as Black, Indigenous people of color, what we're taught in the United States, and I'm talking more about the US experience because I'm from the United States, is that when we think about environmentalists, we usually think of Jane Goodall, David Attenborough, Greta Thunberg, and it's not the fact that they're the problem, right? They've done really great work. They've done great research in their fields. But why is it that if I ask you, can you name 5 Black environmentalists? Can you name 5 Indigenous environmentalists? Can you name 5 other environmentalists of color before you think of white environmentalists? There's a problem there because we have unconscious bias in how we've been indoctrinated to say who are the leaders of this movement. And so I use social media on the moniker of Queer, Brown, Vegan because I truly believe that Generation Z and millennials are one is that a large percentage of people are using social media to receive their climate education, their climate literacy after not learning enough in school. And so if we're actually able to catapult those groups that are related into this young generation, whether that's through fashion, art, technology, food, these are all different topics that intersect into the larger crises that we face. And I think that kind of allows individuals to validate the stories that they're going through. And I think for myself, to be able to work with celebrities or nonprofits or institutions to say, look, as young person of color in this movement, I don't have the resources. I've had to learn how to edit, how to use the camera, how to, design, how to do all of these things that traditionally are not given to children of color. And when I look at my white friends that are environmentalists, they grew up with parents that were photographers, video makers, they were Emmy Award writers for shows. So there's already this bracket in which young people of color are not given the same resources and yet have to compete in this larger system. So if I'm able to actually talk to these philanthropists or celebrities that have the platforms that want to talk about the environment, I say, well, if you're going to talk about the environment, you need to lend your platform to people of color that are at the front lines of this movement, because not only does this actually showcase the allyship there, but it also showcases the need for individuals to actually get the platforms they need to continuously do this work. And I wouldn't have thought to have made this my career full time until 4 years ago when someone told me I should be creating work online, because I thought, maybe I shouldn't be on social media. But the truth is that a lot of us have opportunities out there to explore, and diversity in the environmental movement is still needed. And we need voices from the global South in different countries to be able to continue speaking on their issues respectively and why that matters to them.
Oh, that's amazing. And how has the response been of your community online, like especially on your social media? Like how are people responding? Do you see more people of color becoming leaders of storytellers from a perspective of the messaging you're putting out?
Yeah, I think social media allows for individuals to showcase their narratives without being sometimes exploited. I think in terms of it reflecting in the industry of speaking opportunities or campaigns and commercials, it's still not there yet. There needs to be massive change on that end. But I think social media has allowed young people, especially college students, to start saying, I want to create an account to talk about XYZ issue. And to me, that makes me so happy, because when I was in college, I wasn't on social media. I was actually very scared to be on it, and I didn't want to be judged or perceived. But I feel like a lot of young people now realize that the creator economy is such a huge economy in today's world, that no one wants to work a 9-to-5 job anymore, because it's really exhausting, and I couldn't work it either myself. And so I think freelance and social media provides this alternative view. It's not this whole solution, but I do think that it allows us to actually explore those creative depths that we haven't been able to explore before.
That's an amazing answer, because we work on creative economy a lot. Just to share like a personal story, when I went to COP26, I'm going to be very honest, and I'm going to just put it out there. It was super intimidating in Glasgow, right? As a brown person going to COP26 for the first time. And when I went to Sharm el-Sheikh and the same thing, it was a very different way. I felt naturally very empowered as an individual, which was so powerful. I think the work that you're doing is so important to enable the next generation of voices which are more representative. And it was really amazing to see that. I'm going to move to Neha. Neha, hi, how are you? After a very, very long time, we're connecting again. And we're going to talk about conservation. That's something that you truly work on. And as an individual and as a belief, I think this year, forests and wildlife have a super important role to play when it comes to the community that connects with it. In your experience, from a perspective of writing a book on around this community and the issue, to telling stories on conservation, where do you really see these stories leading to when it comes to climate action and behavior change? Because I feel like a lot of stories that we hear around conservation are really coming again from a micro community and from one lens. How do you see this turning into this mass movement of climate action that actually people understand that they can connect with forests and own it?
Thanks. Thank you for having me, first of all, on a very diverse panel. Thanks. I think animals are missing in the climate movement, and this is something that really affects me. So I'm interested not in knowing how I can be a better communicator, but I'm interested in knowing how people who live with the tiger or the elephant or the leopard or the lion can tell stories. And we have tigers and leopards and lions in the world and in India. And to me, this is a kind of power, a kind of superpower that we need to glamorize or make more important. And there is no climate action without wildlife and without nature. And while we are all thinking about intersectionality in terms of different movements coming together, we also need to talk about intersectionality of nature rights and climate coming together in a more ecological manner, in a scientifically correct way. So, I work on critically endangered birds and animals and ecosystems. And the problem over here is that we know like 5 animals and that's it. So, somebody spoke about how things are invisible, and things are invisible to the extent that we basically don't see millions of species on Earth. And, Avatar is a huge hit, the first film and the second film. And it's amazing that we love the dragons of Game of Thrones and we love the whale shark kind of animal that was in Avatar. But we kind of don't see the same animals in our own lives that they're on planet Earth. And especially for the sea, we are completely blind to what's in the sea. So I would like to give a platform to people who live with these animals. And I would also want to bridge the rural and urban divide that we have, because a lot of people in climate action are urban people and they're not maybe out there with the animals. But we have millions and millions, if not billions of people who live away from urban cities. And the great thing about the internet is that it's a democratic space. So I would be interested to know how I can bring that rural experience to the mainstream. And there are also language barriers, but that can also be, looked at through Translate, etc. And finally, I'm interested to see how I can tell the story of the animal as the animal would see the world that we're in. And I'm fascinated by the fact that we love dystopic stories and we love stories with fantasy animals, but not so much them in real life, if you know what I mean. And I just find this to be a huge blind spot. And I would like this to be, taken up by storytellers across the world.
Point taken, Neha. Point taken. But if I have to probe you, right? We have audiences from Barcelona, we have audiences from Denmark, from India, from US. If you had to share that one story that really, really visualizes how humans live with animals, because I know there's a beautiful ecosystem that very few people are aware of, how elephants and communities connect together and survive, right? And they live together in harmony. It'd be amazing to hear that.
Yeah, and elephants live with people and people call them persons. And there's this incredible personhood movement for animals across the world. And even if we don't think they're persons, we can think that they're like persons. And, we also have tigers that live with people and people are living with them in harmony. And that's why we have 3,500 tigers in India, which is basically, I'm so sorry, someone's at the door. It's basically 80% of the world's tigers are in India. And I would love to be able to tell these ethnographic stories of a young girl who lives next to a tiger, a young man who lives next to an elephant herd, 30 elephants that come to his house every day or his fields every day. How is it happening? It's because we're sharing space. And more specifically in the urban context, making bird lists and making lists of all the wildlife in cities, because cities are really rich in wildlife. So you have the peregrine falcons of New York, you have the black kites of New Delhi, you have the dolphins of Kolkata, you have the leopards of Guwahati, like all over the world, you have wolves coming back to Germany and Denmark. Now, why is it that I see a dire wolf again in Game of Thrones and I love it? But if I'm a German or, somebody from that part of the world where the wolves are coming back, I'm like, oh my God, this needs to be put down. This is like a pest. It's a horrible animal. from Red Riding Hood or something like that. So I just, I'm interested that we should find a place in the world, not just as people, but also people in relation to other animals, people in relation to the wildlife that comes around us. And if everybody were to make a bird list or an animal list of the birds and animals they see, and trust me, there are birds and animals in all our lives. If we were to make that list, we could just start like that. And that would be a beautiful story in itself.
That's so amazing. We saw like this happening during COVID. And I'm reminded by a story when I was in Assam about a couple of weeks ago, about exactly 3 weeks ago. And I was in this community, right, which is very next to like the elephant path that happens. There was deforestation where elephants didn't have a place to go. So they rushed to the village and they start breaking homes, right? And there are these different techniques that communities use to actually protect their homes. But one of the most amazing long-term techniques that worked was when they actually started planting native trees, which were beneficial for the elephants and them both. And it created a solution for both the communities living together. Thank you so much for sharing that, Neha. Like, it was amazing, right? Animals and humans. So we have sun, we have our roots connected, we have communities, we have animals. And if I'm going to go back to you, Tobias, one question which is inspired by Isaiah: how can art lead to behavior change? How can art lead to climate action? And that's a question that I constantly wonder, right? Most of the art projects that I go in are either public spaces or either inside galleries or either inside various things. But I remember about a couple of years ago, Guardian took out this beautiful article that says the only thing that can solve the climate action is more involvement of more artists and creatives coming together and making art as a medium for climate action. How would you like to do that? And I know Denmark has some of the leading examples in the world.
Well, oh, thank you. Well, I'm surrounded by art. Just to look in the back. Well, I think the thing with art is that it makes you happy, and art speaks to your feelings, and it touches you in a way. So in that way, art can be a perfect driver for telling a story. I remember back in 2014, Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, was the host of the UN climate change panel meeting. And in connection with that, the Icelandic artist Ólafur Eliasson, he sailed a lot of big chunks of inland ice and placed them in the middle of the town square in Copenhagen during this meeting. And they were just standing there, slowly melting. And I took my daughter, which at that time was 7 years old. I took my daughter to see this melting ice, and she was really moved by it because she could actually see the ice melting. She could touch it and feel it and taste it and everything. And well, being 7 years old, climate change is like a huge thing, and well, you can't comprehend it. But it actually made it possible for me to talk to her about the issues that we are facing. So when we came back home and sat down at the dinner table, we started talking about climate change, that we need to take care of the climate, and we need to turn off the light when we leave the living room, and so on and so forth. So in that way, art can be a really good driver for conversations, and that's I think that's very important, and I think that's why we need to incorporate art much more in the way we try to engage people in these issues.
Thank you, Tobias, for that. Andres, I have a slightly challenging question, okay? Because I have two really powerful experiences whenever we've collaborated. One was in Barcelona, when I was showing a story from New Delhi, where the air pollution was about 300, 600 AQI. And you had another person showing air quality in Spain, where the AQI was, let's say, 60, right? And for the first time, two stories were shared together, one after another. And I got a response from one of the most senior journalists in Barcelona saying, it's nothing as compared to what's happening in New Delhi, right? And it was this beautiful moment, right, where you had two places facing extreme climate crisis coming together, comparing stories in different ways using data. One was using data visualization and the other was using community storytelling. So when we're taking the problem of crisis of imagination, and when you're going to take it to communities which are marginalized, which are people who don't understand, let's say, for example, the term crisis of imagination, how do we really bring them onto the platform? Because I know that there are creatives everywhere in every community. They just need more access and platforms to be able to connect. What would that be?
Then I love challenging questions, so thanks for that one. And I do remember the moment where essentially we had one approach very westernized. You know, there was a very bad quality, but I guess rich and accurate Excel sheet with all the data that Tamsil is referring to. And then next part was some work of that Productivity has been doing with in rural India, like pure storytelling, people just using their phones and sharing what like the lived experience of these cold Excel sheets in a different part of the world. So I actually think that my response to the question is more or less connected to the previous question and what Tobias was saying. I guess my perspective and also a bit of experience has been that it is really important to think of ways where whenever we think of artists or creatives, you know, this label that is often, you know, referring to contexts that are driven by economy. So, you know, you for example, you place your initiative in the creative economy. What we are doing is trying to reimagine the digital economy. So I think that there's an opportunity, or well, more than an opportunity, it's a task, a need for our survival, which is to shift the stories that we are telling each other, especially those at the high-level decision making. So the dominant story is about green growth. It's a story that tells us that with technology, we are going to solve the problems, that we are going to plant trees, use solar panels, electric cars, and that's it. Everything is solved, which is a fantasy, and that economic growth can continue as it is. So that story is the dominant one, is the one in the agendas in the UN, etc. But then there's the alternative, which is the stories of degrowth, which refer more than anything to setting limits to growth, economic growth, a particular kind of growth, economic growth, on becoming aware of the planetary boundaries and how they are being surpassed. And the barrier to this storytelling shift is essentially a political and cultural one. And by political, I'm not meaning referring to politicians, but as citizens in different places of the world. We need to reflect on how we are making or how we're delegating our decisions to whom, what are their interests, their drivers, their motivations, and think of alternative ways of you know, taking this responsibility, because clearly these existing political systems are not working. So here is where the art comes in, I think, and we need to think of art more as a superpower. I really like what Niho was saying about superpowers, because in a storytelling, the dominant trend has been around superheroes, and that is coming from Hollywood, that is coming from westernized ideas of you know, of our reality. So I think we need to shift the conversation from waiting for a superhero, Elon Musk's billionaires, etc., to save us, and to cultivate superpower through art, through participatory art, through ways that are less about the artwork and more about the art process. Because ultimately, I'm a firm believer that politics is the ultimate form of art, in the same way as poetry, for example, because there is a strong, you know, relation, or the way that we are as humanity relating to the crisis is in a very like one layer way. It's scientific, and science is the truth. but there are other forms of knowledge that can make science stronger. There's the ancestral knowledge. There's I mentioned it already, but the plants and every other forms of life are constantly teaching us. We are just not listening. So I think there's a beautiful book that has been informing my thinking, feeling lately, Braiding Sweetgrass, that I strongly recommend everyone to read, which refers to a braid where these different forms of knowledge are woven. And the way that this works is essentially through putting storytelling as, at the core of the agenda to take climate action, if you know what I mean.
Definitely. I think evolved citizens is something to go forward. I was talking to Gustavo. For a lot of you who don't know, Gustavo is this amazing researcher and teacher. He teaches time. Okay, it's fascinating. He talks about time, history, past, present, future, and connects it in this beautiful way. And he made the statement, which is taking a connotation of hourglass. And he said an hourglass cannot function without a timekeeper, right? You have to keep changing the hourglass to see how much time that's there, where we are owners of the time that we have. Isaiah, I have a really cool question for you. Okay, are you ready for this? It's inspired by Neha. Okay, if I give you a dragon from Game of Thrones, which is basically, let's say, Daenerys' dragon, to go around the world and tell that one story to mobilize the biggest movement you could ever do with the communities that you work with, what would that be? And you'll be on the dragon. I just want to let you know, you will be flying on the dragon.
Wow, this is such a really hard one. I think on my end, it's not so much of providing a story, but maybe providing evidence-based hope. What I tell people sometimes is that hope is sometimes not able to be seen. If you're at an ecosystem, and this is something similar to what other speakers were saying, if you're at an ecosystem, let's say you're at the beach or you're at the forest, and you just think about, wow, there's so much environmental degradation that's happened in the last 40 years. I would not know that certain species of animals are coming back to life due to communities working together. And I think with evidence-based hope, it's not this ideology of wishful thinking, but it's also the ideology of this continued momentum of actually solutions that are being implemented in communities. And that to me is actually one of the strongest ways in which I've been able to actually mobilize young people, is that there's this continued progress that is continuously being made throughout generations. Perhaps I won't be able to see that what seeds I've actually put down in the land, but perhaps my children are going to be able to actually reap those benefits. And I think that is something that a lot of people sometimes really, with the stories of the dragon, it's like mythology has always been really prevalent in many cultures throughout the own regions. Yes, it's probably interpreted from different religions and our identities, but mythology for me has presented itself as a wand. And I think that wand itself is that wooden stick that allows us to reimagine a world of a future, rather than this idea of having a sword to slay the dragon. The sword splices, it cuts, it slices an individual's heart. It doesn't really, it really represents this toxic idea of domination. But I think with the dragon, the wand, and this mythology story behind us, a lot of people can feel inspired of like what other things that they can imagine in their communities of what they can do.
That's such a beautiful way to put it. And I think another example to give is manga and anime, right? And how it's influenced behavior and in a completely different way. Neha, okay, one question connected again, picking up from where we left. Animals and humans living together, getting the same space and like equality in a very powerful way. One of the notions that are coming up across the world, and it's really popular right now, and potentially we'll see a massive growth this year, is nature to business, right? Ecology adding value to economy, but in a collective action way, where communities and animals and everything is protected in a way, but is supporting economies of various countries instead of, let's say, using the ideology of degrowth, right? What would be your idea around that? And what do you think about that? And do you think it's a solution that can go forward?
Absolutely. I think it's very exciting. And, all the boomers, the people who came before us, believe that the only way to grow is to limitlessly grow forever and ever with no caps. And also this idea that technology and capitalism and just this extremely product-based world is the kind of world we should all aspire to live in. And, you know, we are still colonized in the way that we still think about building a mall being like the best way to utilize a piece of land, for example. And the whole idea of nature to business, and this generation that's interested to slow down and to have fun, but also like think a little bit about the land and the sea and where they are in the world. It's a very interesting movement. And I think that this is actually the future, because I work a lot with politicians and I can tell you it's kind of a dead end in many ways. But, you know, with people, especially with younger people who have already begun to miss the things that their parents used to see, like clean rivers or clean air, or, you know, just seeing more wildlife. For example, in life, you know, they've already started to miss what their parents or grandparents used to see. And, you know, the landscapes have changed. So you have this also this landscape of loss in a way, where it's kind of like, this is how it used to be and it's changed forever. At the same time, there's a feeling that we can restore, and we can also monetize this. We can also make intelligent ways of living, which are not necessarily just a dead end. They're very much part of the economy. So I'm interested also in ecotourism, which is clever, which is, you know, intuitive, and involves like young people, for example, or, you know, saving a forest, looking at the water, looking at the trees, and looking at people just safeguarding those things. And before me, Andre spoke about Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a lovely book, and it basically tries to find a way of meaning by reconnecting with nature. And I don't want people to connect with nature after nature is lost. It would be so much more interesting if we connect while it's still there. And it's still there. Nature is still very much there. It's just something that we kind of lost in our conversation about growth, because growth was always about building and construction. And I think the new generation is saying growth is not just about building and construction. It's also about trees and wildlife and water, and just kind of living a life where Isaiah spoke about not wanting to live the 9-to-5 life. So many people don't want to live the 9-to-5 life, and they also want to live a life where you have non-humans, you know. You think a little bit about the bird and the animal. And again, going back to the idea that if everybody could just make a list of the wildlife in their lives and keep building on that list, it's a great story in itself. You know, just to notice where you are. Some of the most, you know, exciting and popular Twitter handles right now are people just counting the wildlife in New York or Delhi or Calcutta or wherever, you know. And that is a living story. It's a living document.
That's so true. And we've already seen impacts of listing, because people get to know so many things about the birds and animals that they would see around themselves. And yes, I think I'm just gonna mention the clarification Andres mentioned. Apologies for calling it an ideology. I did not mean that. It's a theory, degrowth being a theory about limiting economic growth, which is becoming really popular. And I think we're gonna see strides in it in 2023. I think we're also coming to, I mean, I could talk for hours and also take all your time to just, this is like a coffee conversation, which can go on for hours and hours, right? But this year, one of the most critical things, and this is how I look at it, radical hope and like a crisis and an opportunity for citizens to solve that in a big way. But I'm going to take the conversation away from citizens and really look at the industries that influence our life, right? From tech companies to policies, to brands, to art galleries, to various brands, right? Tobias, what's that one thing you expect from them this year that they should change? Because truly it needs to accelerate at a level where people need to understand the crisis we're in. What will be that one expectation from the industry that you're surrounded by? It would be amazing to know that industry. Yes.
Yeah, well, I've been, as was said in the introduction, I've been working with in the branding industry for many years before starting working in Nordic Council of Ministers. And I remember, 15 years ago, working with branding, it was all about making things look great. So the right color, the right typography and everything. So it was all about the money, the fame, the parties, and so on. So the advertising and branding industry, or that kind of storytelling, it was rock and roll. It was quite fun. When I started the Nordic Council of Ministers 8 years ago, that was just about the same time as the UN introduced the Sustainable Development Goals. And well, I think at least in the Nordic region, we've been quite fast at picking up these this vision of 2030, these goals, and but I really hope that more and more companies around the world will start working towards them. I see it coming. It's like a huge tsunami that is coming, but we still have, companies that pump up oil from the underground and so on. I think we need to put a stop to that and focus on how we can leave this planet in a better shape to future generations. So that's my hope. I see it coming. It's on its way, but we need to accelerate it a lot.
In an incremental way, 100% agree. Now, Andreas, picking up from a point that you mentioned, actually, branding in 2020 needs to be about values. And I think somehow when I look at the fashion industry, that's pretty much the way sustainable fashion became like the keyword which everybody was aligning to, and now it's evolving into a deeper conversation. However, not solving the consumerism crisis yet. What would that one thing be? Same question.
In the fashion industry?
No, in the tech and in the industry that you're surrounded by. I was just giving an example of
with the okay.
2020s and values. Yeah. But what
Yeah,
would be the one thing you would want? Because I know that you work on some amazing, crazy things for industries to change. What would be the one expectation in 2023 from which industry?
Yeah. Also, very briefly, I forgot to mention just like two things about my positionality, so folks understand where my thoughts are coming from. So I'm a Latin American, so I identify myself as a Latin American, and I'm a migrant. So I've been here for a while in Barcelona. But yeah, that's important to understand a little bit better my perspective, and also I am, let's say, industry agnostic. I mean, we have been working across with organizations across media, arts and culture, more recently creative technology, but more than anything, helping them develop initiatives, programs towards more responsible ways of taking climate action in multiple fronts, from philanthropy to education. So I think in particular, looking at the tech industry, there's a lot going on there now with the layoffs and with the embrace of automation, aka AI. So what I think needs to happen now this year is essentially on the side of the tech workers. Tech workers, it's not cool to say I work in the weapon industry. It's not cool to make weapons that kill humans or other forms of life. So I think that we are in a moment where the scale of big tech in particular is having a similar negative impact. So it should not be cool to work at any of these big data extraction corporations. And if these companies keep losing like the critical talent that makes them as valuable as they think they are, society at large will be able to hold them more and more accountable. And there is a lot of very courageous people in the US and in other places that are organizing, are forming unions, are claiming rights, are holding their own employers accountable. So yeah, I think I expect more of this happening. More people organizing inside big companies. It's crazy. Amazon has like more than 1 million employees, I think. The scale of these corporations is, I think, critical. And if we as a society, as activists, as organizers, if we put pressure in 100 companies or 10, the impact that this can have is going to be way stronger than if we keep fragmenting our activities. We need also to be like, let's say, more coordinated in that sense.
That's super crucial. I 100% align with that. And I think if people want to track a lot of unions and worker rights being fought in the US, I think because that's where most of these companies are located, you should definitely visit coworker.org, where a lot of people are coming together to bring these problems at front. Isaiah, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now a lot of young people don't have access to generational wealth. That does not exist. And I think, to be quite frank, a lot of the environmentalists that I'm friends with come from generational wealth. So when I work with corporations as an influencer, unfortunately, yeah, I do try to work with the most smallest and ethical companies as much as possible. I don't work with, Coca-Cola, the top plastic polluters. I don't try to work with these large industrials that have issues, but I think on my end is actually working with companies in the US to actually create incubator programs that fund young people to do climate activism work. When I was in college, I had $0 to do any type of work. And so I'm right now in my mid-20s. If I'm able to actually get these corporations to say, look, if you don't want to give up money, let's create a program that funds these young people. Let's create a PR, messaging about what you're doing for sustainability initiatives and get money into these young people, because the amount of young people that are always telling me, I have a solution, I have a solution, I have a solution, but I have no money, no resources, no mentorship. What are we doing, right? And I think I've realized that I've come to a point is that as I'm getting older in this movement, I need to also think about how I'm giving back to younger people so they don't struggle the same way I'm struggling with. And it's honestly a privilege for people to not even have to think about those things, because I think as an influencer too, I get critiqued from individuals of like, why are you taking money from corporations? And it's like, well, where do you get your money? Because I've fought with nonprofits, I've fought with philanthropies wanting to fund my work, and they all say no. So if I need to go into the business sector to get funding for my career and get funding for others, then I will do that. I think there needs to be this transparency within the environmental movement of where we're getting our money, whether that's from our parents, whether that's from the rich grandparents, our siblings, our wealth resources that we have, because that is what's going to open up opportunities for young people. And I do not like the fact that as I've gotten older, more people are very not transparent where they're getting their funding from. And that to me is a bit not fair for young people who are trying to make it out in their career. And I try to be as transparent as possible with all my funds. So why can't others be the same?
That is so important, especially in the creator economy. I think if from a general knowledge perspective, India just recently launched, like changed the law where influencers need to declare where they're getting their money from and the goods that are coming in, just for transparency's sake, because there was so much of branded sponsored content influencing people in various ways. And that's a shift. I feel that's a very powerful move, which will increase transparency in a good way. Neha, same question, but also the field that you're in, conservation, is one of the most powerful things, and people need to connect with it a lot more. So in 2023, what should the industry and be influenced in doing? Same question.
I think we can't just destroy places with no consequence the way industry tends to do, big industry, I mean. And you've just had the CBD meeting, the Convention on Biological Diversity meeting, and we've had this huge new goal of 30 by 30, which is by 2030, we're supposed to protect 30% of land and sea and fresh water on Earth. And therefore, if all companies could take this pledge and try to minimize their operations in terms of going vertical rather than horizontal, because we still have huge land that's given up to industry, in all kinds of industry. Even the so-called green ones, like the solar or the wind power, for example, are still getting hundreds of square kilometers of land, and it's basically a modern land grab. It's like the modern coal rush. So even stuff that's so-called green, but it's destroying habitats and destroying species, wildlife, is something that needs to be questioned. And if we are to take the 30 by 30 goals seriously, then industry has to join in. It can't just be communities and it can't just be governments, because industry actually owns a lot of land and water. So if you look at the trawling industry, for example, like they're doing whatever they want in the high seas and territorial waters. And the second big one is plastic. And obviously, we've been talking about plastic for years. And there's a new Cronenberg film, in which people are so advanced that they're eating plastic, but actually we are actually eating plastic even in our daily lives, and it's a huge byproduct of our consumerism, but also the way that industries don't take extended producer responsibility of recycling whatever packaging they're making. And this is something that needs to happen from a climate perspective. It takes a lot to make a plastic, but once it's there in turtles, it's there in babies, it's there in fish, it's like everywhere. So, I mean, climate action is also about finding which are the products that shouldn't be there on Earth and getting them out of our producer chains. It is also about understanding how that product is impacting people and wildlife and ecosystems. So I would say looking at 30 by 30 with industry, along with scaling back on some of these horrible products, microplastics and plastics, those are the really big ones for me.
Agree. I think my body is filled with microplastics. I mean, I switched from takeaway cups, which were plastic, to glass at a much later stage. I think half my blood is microplastic. I totally agree with that, Neha. I want to thank everyone for being on the panel. And thank you for sharing such a beautiful conversation. I think what we're really doing with this panel is to help people think differently this year, right? And it's happening in January, where people can start thinking about their climate action from a lens that they're not influenced by one message, be it from either side, right? And they can really think that they need to make decisions themselves and creatively solve problems. Like Isaiah says, like people have solutions every day. So I really want to thank everyone on the panel, and I really hope everyone watching this had an amazing time. Anyone you want to be in touch with, connect with, all the social handles are going to be available after the panel. And I think this conversation cannot end. It needs to turn into climate action. So thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, Neela, to close the panel.
Thank you so much, Tamsil. This was so interesting. And I've been putting things up on the chat so as not to interrupt, because whatever you said really resonated with so many of the campaigns that we do. We have an Earth Reel contest for students where they have to look at the world through an environmental lens and make environmental films. And all these are up on our YouTube channel. So as you said, do connect with us on all our various social media handles. I will personally write to each of you to figure out how we can take Earth Day forward, because all these various important international days need to be commemorated. And it is a great way, especially for youth in schools. I think their first, in schools is when you start commemorating Earth Day and other environmental days. And that basically leads later on to civic action, later on leads them to become green citizens of the world. So do log on to the other webinars that are part of the Learning Planet Festival, and let's keep in touch to take the environmental movement forward. Thank you so much, all of you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
I've recorded this, so we'll send
yeah.
the recording.
Yeah.
Thank you, Samita, too. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Stop recording. Aisha. Yes.